episode today, talking to great companies and founders and CEOs about their business and the culture. And we're streaming live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch, I think. That would be a kind of cool thing, FaceTube. So I'm going to pass it to my co-host and co-producer, Kim, who's going to introduce the show. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Tulio. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you once again for joining us here at Dojo Live. Today is Wednesday, the 23rd of October, 2019, and here we like to co-create the future of workplace diversity by sharing and learning from the stories and experiences of tech luminaries. As Tulio said, my name is Kim Lantis. I'm broadcasting live from one of Nearsoft's offices in Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico. Tulio is joining us from his home in LA, and we also have Carlos Ponce with us in Mexico City. Hey, Carlos.
Hi, Kim.
Hey. So today we're going to be discussing a key aspect, I think, of any successful human interaction, and that's collaboration. So here we can, to tell us how to adapt collaboration technologies to today's digital workforce, is John Arnold, the principal of J. Arnold and Associates. Welcome to Dojo Live, John.
Okay, thank you for having me, Kim, and everybody watching and listening and tuning in. It's really great to have this live platform to talk collaboration and, yes, culture and the intersection with technology. It's a pretty interesting space.
It is. Thank you so much for being here. So to get us started a bit, John, if you could, just a couple minutes of telling us a bit about you personally, your background, as well as J. Arnold and Associates.
Well, sure. So I am based in Toronto, Canada. So I think amongst us, I'm probably in the chilliest place today, but it's actually pretty nice. As an independent analyst in the technology space, I focus primarily on collaboration and contact center technologies. And my background is more really about marketing and business than the nuts and bolts of technology, but I understand it well enough to communicate and understand the trends, what's happening in the broader industry, right, with where these technologies have business value and how they're impacting what really we talk about now is the digital workforce, the digital workplace. Really interesting times because technologies are changing fast and the implications are big. And we have big generational shifts going on, right, with digital natives taking over the workforce and digital immigrants kind of hanging on, but still very important to the mix. And that's a lot of challenges to manage. And technology has a pretty central role to play in all of this.
Certainly. Thank you. So before we get to the merge of technology with this, I think it would be nice to get to the heart of collaboration first. So I was wondering if you could perhaps define collaboration in your own words, what it means to you and why it's so important.
Well, sure. So collaboration, it's a very fluid term. And unfortunately, in my little world of following collaboration technologies, it's become such a gray area. It's kind of capturing many things that normally wouldn't be put together. But really, in the workplace, collaboration is about obviously more than one person. So it's about working in teams for a common goal or project. And there's a process of collaboration, right, where you start with you may have an objective that you have to reach. You have a team that's going to work on that objective. And then there's workflows that go along the way of collaborating to get those jobs done. So that's kind of how it works in the business world. The technology space plays a role because collaboration is really about communication, right? I mean, you could get a one-page outline and says, here are 5 things your team has to do, but to do those things, people have to work together. And so that means kind of like what we're doing here, we are communicating visually, we're communicating with audio, but then you also have to express your ideas and coordinate things. So there's a lot of project management involved. There's a lot of sharing of ideas with documents, co-creating possibly on a whiteboard, etc. And then you have to share the information and you have to be able to access everything. And that's, we'll get to this a little later, guys, but the traditionally collaboration has kind of lived in a world of silos where telecom, the voice piece is over here, the video piece might be over here, the text or the IM pieces might be following at the bottom of your screen, but it's all kind of standalone stuff. Not very effective way to work. Collaborating, almost a better way to think of it is like orchestration. So I'm a musician as well. When you think about a conductor in a classical symphony scenario, that conductor knows all the pieces, where the strings go, the horns, etc., brings it all together, and when they're all in tune and in sync, it's a beautiful thing. And that's a bit like what collaboration is, and these technologies that we're going to talk about help that orchestration, because now when all of that activity and workflow happens in one place and it's kind of being coordinated, a bit like, a bit behind the curtain, you don't see it, but it's happening. All of a sudden, you can see the outcomes happening. They're better, they're easier, and this will touch on, I think, where we're going to go later, Julio, about culture, how when it's easier to work together in teams, everything else flows from there in a much better way.
Right, because I think I like your music analogy, right? Because you can either have everything flowing and create this beautiful music, or it could just be a whole bunch of noise.
Cacophony, sure.
Yeah. Thank you for the technical term. As you can tell, I myself am not a musician.
Usually when I'm trying to play music, it sounds like noise.
Yeah, me too. I have the pleasure of my 8-year-old daughter learning to play the recorder right now, so that's fun.
Cool.
So let's talk about this idea of culture, and I would like to incorporate this idea of perhaps collaboration tools, digital teams. A lot of times now, a basic and very common underlier of digital teams is multicultural teams, right? You've got people from all over the world, just like we are here today. And there can be cultural issues and perhaps clashes or even simple misunderstandings that we might not even perceive as cultural differences. Have you experienced anything like that? And do you have any ideas as to how we could better that collaboration and get over any of those hurdles?
Oh yeah, this is a pretty rich topic, actually, and the major vendors who are driving a lot of these technologies and platforms into the marketplace are very cognizant of what's going on, mainly because they're big companies themselves, so they're living this every day. And I'm talking about companies like Cisco, Microsoft, Google, the big players who have huge influence in the marketplace. So a few things that they're seeing is, first of all, there's no question that the workplace has become more diverse. That's partly a generational thing, but it's really about how the workplace and the business environment has become very global, right? Most businesses today are global, even small businesses, in part because the technology makes it easy to do that. So there's really no geographic barriers anymore, and that it goes both ways. It's good because it opens up your markets. It's bad because there's more competitors. So the bottom line is you need to have a workforce that reflects the needs of your customers. And by definition, we just have a much more inclusive environment today. And technology, of course, is agnostic to everything. So it doesn't matter what your gender is, your skin color, your language. It can address all of this. And I can speak to some very specific examples that are really, really well suited for exactly what we're talking about here. So when we start getting into the technologies of collaboration, we start touching on artificial intelligence, AI. So that's one of the big trends, right? Everyone's figuring out, what do we do with this stuff? So in our world, when it's communication, some very important collaboration applications are two things. One is called speech to text. One is called text to speech. And this is the idea when you have real-time capability, largely through speech recognition technology. So you guys could be doing this in Spanish. To me, if we were using an AI platform, I'd be getting your commentary translated in real time in English. So I'd be able to follow. And likewise, I could be speaking back to you in English. You'd be getting it in Spanish, like a teleprompter on your end. And now that's a real game changer for enabling kind of multilingual teams, right? When you're talking about, having product teams that are halfway around the world, and on short notice, you have to engage with customers and you don't speak their language, it's kind of magic to have one of these real-time translation capabilities at your fingertips so you can just seamlessly jump into the meeting and follow along and be understood. That's a pretty powerful tool. Another, of course, is there's two things, text to speech and speech to text. So I'm talking right now about speech to text, where we're talking turns up in text, right? Now, the text to speech is another thing which is really beneficial because now you can take the content of what's being written, translate it into a speech-based format. So for people who say can't follow in real time in the meeting, they could get the flow of information delivered to them, say in podcast form, and they could listen to it later on. And that's what a podcast can do as well. But sometimes there's a lot of text-based content that can be converted into speech. It's a pretty powerful tool. Another thing that's important with this technology is when we're talking.
Mind your interruption. I think that's really beautiful, not just across languages, but I think it's a really nice way to be inclusive, perhaps of people who are mute or deaf.
Exactly. So my youngest brother actually is deaf, so I've grown up with this my whole life, and it's really a very effective way. Of course, you can have interpreters doing this in real time. And I was just at a conference last week in San Francisco where they had an interpreter serving the hard of hearing audience, and it's really cool to watch. But when you're in an environment like this and most people don't have an interpreter, sure, absolutely, it's a great way to include them into the mix, right? And they're even developing applications, of course, for vision impaired people as well. And all this speaks to, you've got language, you have any kind of a disability. It's really great because not only does it allow people from all languages and cultures, et cetera, to work together, but it opens up opportunities for people who may not normally be able to get employment in an office setting. It could also be people with mobility issues, right? Who have lots to offer, but can't get out of the house, right? Or they're really restricted where they can go. So all of a sudden you can add all these people to your workforce. And it's really great because now you could get retirees, you could get people who have been, who are missing limbs, et cetera. All of a sudden they can be just as valuable contributors to anybody else. So there's a lot to like, right, about what these technologies can do today.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Often we talk about inclusion and diversity, but in the vernacular of cultures and race and creed and gender, but there's individuals like who can't hear or can't see who are left out. And so what are some of the companies? Are there companies adapting these in order to attract and bring on that kind of talent to the organization, create opportunities that's truly more inclusive that way? What's working, or is this something more like a future thing coming?
Well, it's in the market today. So I can't name specific companies who are deploying these technologies, but as I mentioned, Microsoft and Cisco in particular, their collaboration platforms, ironically, both of them are named Teams. You figure they could be a little more creative, but that's what they have. So
if it's not broken, why fix it?
Well, yeah, if one's doing it, the other one's going to do it, right? But still, that's very much, especially Microsoft, because they own the desktop, which is still kind of the hub of how most people work today. And what they're trying to do is extend that desktop experience to everywhere else in the organization. And that's inclusive, increasingly means globalized teams, people working from remote settings, et cetera. So these are like now almost native capabilities. The speech recognition accuracy and effectiveness is still not 100%, but it's pretty darn good. And a good watchword for this is to see, if you follow these companies, when they're making updates, those updates will always include new languages that they've added to this speech to text capability. So now they can reach a broader and broader audience, right? So it's, because Microsoft is everywhere, they're going to support 1 million languages. And, Google's going down the same path. Amazon is going down the same. The guys who are really strong in AI and speech recognition technology. So we're at the early days, but it's very viable right now, Tulio. I mean, companies are definitely taking advantage of this.
I'm thinking like in organizations that are global in nature that have like a whole hands meeting, right? Sometimes the language and the whole hands could be English, sometimes something else, right? And there's a few people who end up being left out of their own all hands. They're not able to follow the information because it's being spoken very quickly or what have you. And so there's this ill feeling that comes across that individual, like, oh, I'm not really I'm sort of a second class citizen because I'm not getting what I need to get from this thing, and they don't participate. So can this technology help to bridge that gap, and how effective can that be implemented realistically?
Well, I think it can be implemented pretty well. As I say, most organizations have certainly access to enough bandwidth. It's not that expensive. It doesn't require replacing your computers. You can even take advantage of these on your mobile phones. About the only things you might want to invest a little more in might be some mid-sized monitors or screens for small meeting spaces to make it more accessible to work this way. But generally, the pieces are there now to do this. And I should also mention another real benefit of this in this speech-to-text capability, and this is a cultural item, is the idea that you can also have not just real-time translation, but real-time transcription. So in other words, as we're talking, when you have this capability, and again, most platforms can support this now, you will see the text kind of scrolling along, much like when you watch closed caption TV, but it's much more accurate. And why that's good is it takes people away from having to worry about taking notes the whole time they're collaborating, right? So this means they can be more present. They can focus on the task at hand, because one of the problems is when we're doing this like video feed thing, we're engaged, right? But a lot of people will block the video. So I could do that right now. You can't see me. And I'm just going to be typing away, doing a million other things. I'm not paying attention. But
Right.
now when you've got that text coming to you real time, you don't have to worry about doing other things. You can just be right there. So I don't want to be cynical, Tulio and Kim, but you can talk a lot about very mobile-centric kids today. They can't focus for long periods of time. Their attention span is short. And that's a bit of a problem culturally in some organizations.
Of course.
Right? So, but when you have that speech-to-text capability, that transcription happening, you will have an accurate record of the whole thing. So you don't have to worry, oh, I wasn't paying attention, I missed that. That it's all going to be there for them later. They can read it. And in fact, sometimes no one takes 100% perfect notes in a meeting anyways. Right. So this way, it's right, it's dead on. So there's no disputing about who said what in a meeting. So this makes the collaboration process a lot smoother. And that can also tie in, again, culturally, Tulio, to this idea that, if you're in an environment, and many are like this, that they're multi-generational. Some companies have 4 generations of workers in there, different communication styles. Well, kind of like when you've got it in text and it's pretty accurate, you can't argue with it, right? You can't say, oh, you weren't speaking clearly, or you weren't really understanding me, or, all that kind of stuff. It's all there for the record. So that kind of factors out.
I do have a question involving this. I like this idea of an AI, because I think there is a human component that text might not be able to capture. Like, what if I was being sarcastic or making a joke or those types of things? How might that come into play now or in the future?
Well, okay, so now there are the emojis, right? That's becoming an official language now, right?
The transcription will have an emoji to highlight.
Exactly. Here's what I really meant. So this is getting into another aspect of AI that I think we'll speak to, something I think Tulio wants to get to, and that's with trust. We're talking about stuff that's AI driven, which just sounds kind of sexy, which is good, but AI can also be very pervasive, can be very intrusive. It can also be a bit big brotherish, right? So when you get into this issue about what were you really thinking or trying to say there, so some of the more advanced capabilities with AI we get into the area of what's called analytics, where everything you say and do can be captured in some form of a digital format. So in other words, our body language, our tone of voice, our patter, our whatever you want to call it, all of those things can be captured. So there are things like what are called sentiment analysis, where if I pause a bit too much, or, that indicates I might be anxious. And I might not even be conscious of it. I just might be in the moment, right? Well, those applications can chime in possibly to your manager who's following remotely, who's only going to pay attention when certain alerts pop up on their screen and says, that guy's out of line. Or this person just said something that was under embargo and shouldn't have been said because it's been flagged as something that's sensitive. So all of a sudden, AI has that kind of constant ear on the conversation that can be a little problematic. So, I don't know if you followed the baseball game last night, guys, but after the game, one of the Astros owners made some pretty stupid remarks, and he's trying to backpedal on them, and they were kind of sexist and problematic. And, it's all there. You can't deny it. So if he had an AI filter going on behind him, that would have bailed him out. It's just,
Stop.
you have, so, right?
Like, beep, beep. Don't say that. I want to, it's funny, you said something interesting I want to go back to. First of all, we're two generations here. We got the old guys like me and Carlos and the young guys. No, just kidding. Right, Carlos? Just making sure he's still there.
All right. Yeah.
So you said something interesting about the captions, right? So I've noticed that even with videos that people use on Instagram or on LinkedIn, there's captions are there because people are actually reading the caption instead of listening to the words. But I like the idea of translating them in multiple languages. Can it be geo-fenced? So, like, for example, people watching Dojo Live in Latin America would see a transcription in Spanish. Someone watching Dojo Live in France would see it in French. Does that exist yet? Is that something
Exactly. So, like, if you're in
that.
Yeah, well, it is pretty cool, right? So this is why this would probably dictate your choice of platform. So if you were ever going to go down this path and say, yeah, we really would love to have this real-time translation, when you start looking at who's offering this, you would give them a list of, say, these are the languages I need, right? And how good is your capability in each of those? And then once you find one that's got a good fit, yeah, absolutely. I think, the user can pick from a drop-down menu, right, which language they want to receive the translation in, and it's there. So it's independent of location. It's just I could be in Japan, but I want it I want it in French, and it doesn't matter where I am. It's just whatever the languages are supported, that will give it to me, right?
Well,
so that's pretty cool.
What I like about that, at least internally for companies who are trying to enhance the quality of services they provide to employees, trying to build more trust with their employees. What I like about that is often you as the employee, it's on you to go learn the language, the main language, to really get up.
Mm-hmm.
This is a way to kind of meet somewhere in the middle and say, okay, we're going to do the meeting in English, for example, but the translation will be in your local language. Is this, how easy is that to implement today? And why would companies not want to do it, for example? What's holding them back from doing it?
I don't think there's anything holding them back, unless, of course, they're not wanting to support a more diverse workplace. But that's kind of going against everything that works today. So there's really no reason not to. But I can tell you that this idea of kind of real-time translation, is barely a year available into the market. It's still pretty new. Right. So it's one of those things where, it's a bit like, Instagram, we didn't have that 3 or 4 years ago, and now everybody uses it. The good news with a lot of this new technology is that it can be adopted very quickly because it doesn't require a lot. Everything, this is this is really about the cloud, right? Where when everything is in the cloud, it's built for scale, it's built for speed, and these companies, especially the big ones who are driving so much of this technology, they have more cloud than anyone will ever need. And so they can support any level of deployment for this stuff. And of course, that's why they're pushing this to the market, because they want you to be tied to their system. And so that's good news for them. Maybe not such good news for the smaller guys who can do just as good a job, but they've got to somehow break through and, get to the marketplace. But really, Tulio, as I mentioned, there's no big investment you've got to make in technology or tools. The beauty of these cloud applications is that they're on demand, they're there, they're not expensive to use, and you don't have to really worry too much about it, other than being conscious that there's always potential security risks that you have to make sure your network is secured, right? You're not getting too many people going over public Wi-Fi networks or being sloppy, that kind of thing. So as long as you kind of take care of business on that end, the technology itself is pretty good. If there's anything as a holdback, it's just that A, people don't trust the technology, and B, they think it has to be 100%, which is unfortunately not the right way to look at this. This technology keeps getting better all the time. So even if you start small, do a 10-minute meeting with 3 offices, and you learn as you go. It gets better. Because the other thing with this technology, it's based on what's called machine learning. And what happens as we do these meetings, it picks up your vocabulary, your acronyms, your expressions.
Sarcastic ones.
Yeah, and even those, right? So when you say yeah, once it figures out what that really means, it knows, oh, sarcasm. It can interpret that. And then once it's hardwired into that kind of vocabulary that you've built, it's going to be 100% every time going forward. So it gets better and better as you use it, It's like training your dog. It's the same thing. You're just training it to learn.
You know what I liked about this? Imagine I just keep thinking often, having moved from New York to the West Coast 11 years ago, it was such a different culture. Like New Yorkers pretty straightforward in your face. West Coast tend to be a little bit more laid back. And this would be awesome. Like when someone's sarcastic is presenting something from New York, it gets translated or in a way that it's not sarcastic for other
Exactly. I like that. Yeah.
Right? That could be kind of cool. So you're never ruffling any feathers. So anyway, we're speaking of attention spans. We are coming up on time. I think Carlos had some additional questions.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in learning what your company does to help organization with this. But let's see what Carlos has before we do that.
Yeah. Sure. I have a question, and I'm sorry I'm being kind of quiet because I'm trying to listen in and making a few notes for our tweets that'll be happening soon.
Which we would have to do with live transcriptions.
Yeah. So, John, you did mention that artificial intelligence can be a cool thing, for example, but also a little bit invasive, and I quote you, big brotherish. I kind of like the term. Okay, so you also mentioned that we need to somehow bring in the element of, or the idea of sentiment analysis, right, into the equation, right? So I like also that. So when it comes to sentiment analysis, and when you're dealing with tech items like AI, for example, what do you think is that we're going to be able to differentiate who we're talking to? Let me just give you an example. I was looking for, we're trying to work on some content strategies. So I found a tool that's called an AI tool called Article Forge that allows you to actually write copy, the articles or posts for blogs and things like that, but it's all AI. So all you need to do is just punch in a few keywords and a few pointers, and the whole thing is going to give you something like a product, finished product that seemingly or was supposedly written by a human. So that leaves kind of the human element out of the equation. So what do you think is in the near future, how are we going to be able to differentiate if we get sophisticated enough with AI? How are we going to be able to differentiate who we're dealing with, or whether what the person we're talking to is really a human or not? So I'm concerned about losing the human element.
That's a good one.
Totally. You talk about a culture issue, Tulio and Carlos. This is the flip side of this stuff, and I talk about this fairly regularly. It's like, okay, when it gets to be so good, when you can't tell the difference, that's one thing, because now you first of all, you can't tell when you're being spoofed or spooked or phished or spammed or whatever, which is a legitimate thing in itself. The other thing, though, too, is AI, this sounds all nice and cool, but on a business level, AI is mostly viewed as an automation technology, right? And a lot of businesses view this as with an eye to how do we reduce labor costs. So when you talked earlier, Tulio, about trust, well, you want your employees to have the good with AI, which everybody would like, but they also know in the back of their minds, hey, if this stuff is getting so good, I might be out of a job. And there isn't any industry on the planet that isn't somehow potentially threatened by this. You read every day about banks closing branches, et cetera, et cetera. And who's going to have a job 10 years from now? And so that's just a bit of a scary part that, we don't have a balance in store yet. But as long as we're in charge, as long as the humans are still building AI and deploying it and trying to sell it, we're still on top. But of course, you can get to these other scenarios that you can name any sci-fi movie you want where they take over and we're enslaved to them. I mean, that's hopefully that's another lifetime for me. But Kim, I think you've got to be worried right now. So.
Well, thank you, but I'm probably not quite as young as you think.
Away. That's like 80 years if we ever get to general AI.
Just, I hate to say it, guys, but just look at what's happening in China, right? I mean, and even in the US for that matter, you go to a Starbucks anywhere, you look up in the ceiling, is like half a dozen security cameras. I'm just buying coffee. It's actually more to watch the employees, to monitor how well they're serving the right amounts and keeping them honest. It doesn't take much to see. So the flip side of this technology being so available and inexpensive, it's very quickly turning into a surveillance society, and that's not really what we want. But unfortunately, it's hard to see how it's not going to go that way. And that's a culture issue for sure.
Definitely not going to help build trust. As much as all the companies building it say, oh yeah, this is going to help improve productivity, et cetera. It's just not going to help build trust. But that's a whole topic for another conversation.
It is.
Next one. Next one.
Very quickly, just to wrap up, we're over time. What do you offer? What is, companies watching this, interested in this? Is this something your company does? Give us a quick.
Sure, Tulio. So as an analyst, we're independent. We follow the market trends. So I get most of my work helping companies communicate the value of their technology to the marketplace in business language, right? So I don't get into the details of technology, but I help them basically position their messaging in a way that their buyers and users will understand. I will help them I can speak to their customers. I can conduct workshops to help them develop strategies to position their technologies in a way that buyers will understand, and also to help them understand the implications of these digital technologies, how they're transforming the workforce. We call that digital transformation, right? Future of work. That's where a lot of this stuff is going. So I provide advisory to help companies bridge those technologies and use the right ones. And I help the vendors who make and sell this stuff to communicate their messages to the marketplace in a meaningful way. So I write a lot. I have a lot of thought leadership avenues through podcasts, webinars, et cetera, white papers. That's how people come to know me. And eventually they say, oh, you could help us with our strategy. So that's kind of how the business works for me.
Well, John, it's been a pleasure to have you as a guest. We might have to set up an additional conversation about the Big Brother watching kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm personally interested as well as in some sort of success stories. Obviously, we'll have to keep certain things anonymous, I think, but I'd like to see how you've been able to see this kind of digital collaboration take a company or companies from A to B and what that story was like.
Okay, sounds good.
John, pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Kim, thank you for being the awesome host, and Carlos for doing what you do. I love you, brother.
Well,
okay.
You might have, John, you might have think that I'm kind of laying low and remaining
Carlos
silent.
got John here, didn't he?
Yeah,
it was.
I think it all started 4 years ago.
I kind of miss our AI bot that we used to have, Carlos.
Oh, yeah, the high-tech one. The high-tech one, right?
Because you can't see it on the podcast, but we might have to bring that back,
That would be fun. So, John, the only thing left for me to do is just thank you big time for having been with us. I'll share with you an updated version of the landing page with a thumbnail image for the video. And if there's anything you want me to add to that page, send it over to me. I'll add it right there. And please keep us posted on any traction that comes out of this, because we're going to be promoting all the whole Dojo Live media company that we're building very heavily. You might get some traction out of this too. So at the very least we can do, because you gave us 30 minutes of your time, so we'll give you something in return. So hopefully.
Very good.
All right. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay in touch.
All right. Thanks for everybody.
Thank you.